Here on today's Agriculture News Update, we're checking in with Jeff Peterson, who serves as the president of Heartland Farm Partners. We get the latest market activity. And Jeff, let's just start out talking about what we've seen in the markets over the past couple of weeks now.
You know, it's really been something when the markets were going higher. It seemed like they were never going to stop going higher, and bullish news just kept coming in. But believe it or not, as we take a look at new crop corn, you know, we've dropped about 17% or a little over $1. And that happened very, very quickly here. And that's got everybody kind of asking, where do we go from here?
Well, let's try to answer that question. Where do we go from here? Particularly, I know we're keeping an eye on South American weather right now, and things are presumably still dry down there. So why are prices here in the U.S. going lower in terms of corn, but also factor in the soybean side of things too?
You know, it's always interesting. We haven't had one of these type of markets in a while where we've started off on weather problems out of South America, and in particular, you know, it started in Argentina, then moved into Brazil, and that safrinha corn crop is where most of our talk has been focused. And really what we're getting to a point down there is the crop's getting far enough along, and the crop is also, the estimates are getting low enough that ultimately everybody is kind of saying, you know what, we know it's bad, we know there's going to be problems, but that's getting pretty well factored in now. Everybody now has to kind of sort out, okay, what size of the crop is. So then, for this time of year, and ever since we got past the May crop report, you know, in that first couple weeks of May when that came out, then we all of a sudden start moving our attention to U.S. weather. And overall, what we have going on here in the U.S., if you look at the drought monitor, it's still dry. You talk about topsoil and subsoil, you talk about Iowa, North Dakota, parts of South Dakota, Minnesota, they're still dry. But we are picking up some rains, and there's some rains have fallen. So overall, those areas are shrinking a little bit. So anytime the market sees that we've seen some shrinking in those dry areas, then it's stepping back, and all of a sudden, instead of buying those dips, they're kind of selling those rallies. And that's kind of what we're seeing right now, Bryce.
So what's it going to take to turn this market around and lead to some higher prices?
Well, I think in the short term, what it's going to take us to continue to see China in buying, which they've continued to buy corn. But it's also going to take us to see some weather problems. And what does that mean? It means we're going to have to see the temperatures increase, and we're going to have to see some areas that are going to run a little short on moisture and just not quite getting enough. And we've kind of got that table set because the old crop stocks are tight. It's not that we're going to run out, except on beans we're extremely tight. But when we have this type of tightness and we have some weather that isn't really favorable, then that's what it's going to take to go ahead and cause this market to bounce.
On the soybean side of things, Jeff, we've seen tight soybean stocks, but why haven't we seen basis improving for soybeans?
Yeah, exactly. We've actually seen, if you look over the past 2 weeks in here, we've actually seen that basis weaken, and it was really kind of a big surprise, but we haven't heard a lot of people talk about it, and it's not because of the demand at the crushers. The soybean processing plants went away. Actually, what it is, Bryce, it's just that difference in price between the U.S. and Brazil. So here's kind of what happened. So elevators went ahead and sold their beans out there to individual commercial grain traders that were going to take those beans and take them export. And what happened, though, is we got a big enough difference between the price in Brazil and the U.S. prices that they were able to say, you know what, we're going to sell those trains back to you, Mr. or Mrs. Elevator, and we're going to go buy those bushels out of South America, and we're going to put them on a ship, and we're going to send them to, whether it's to China or to Europe, wherever those beans need to go. So what that caused is those elevators, and they were more than willing to take those bushels back because they made some money on them. And so then what they did is they went ahead and sold those beans that were intended for export. They sold them into those local crush markets. And that was enough to give those local crush markets, those local soybean processing plants, enough bushels to get by for a while. So for every train that they physically sold back, and then on most of this activity sounds like it happened on the UP rail line, you know, that's upwards of 400,000 bushels. For a lot of those facilities, that's a day and a half or 2 days supply. So that was enough to go ahead and cause those soybean crush facilities to get comfortable, and then they were able to back their basis off. And when they did that, that caused other elevators to get scared that all of a sudden the top was in and they sold more beans. I think we'll see this basis firm on beans as we get a little later in the summer, but it's going to take a little time because they've got enough beans for now.
Very fascinating. Let's talk about Chinese corn demand. According to the export reports, China continues to buy in large volumes of U.S. corn. Why is their demand for U.S. corn so strong right now?
You know, that's the biggest thing we kind of dig into, because what we know is we always talk about their hog herd, right? And we know that they're not quite back to full speed, but there's a few things as you dig into the details that really kind of stand out. And what we did is we went back and looked in the WASDE report and we said, where is this demand coming from? So we said, let's look at everything they could be feeding these soybean or these hogs And we know they're feeding them soybeans for the soybean meal, but let's look at also barley, and let's look at wheat demand, and let's look at grain sorghum, oats, and corn. And what we found comparing the 2019 crop year to the 2020 crop year, in the 2020 crop year, corn is the stuff they harvested last fall. What we find there is that their demand actually on the feed side has increased 40 million metric tons. Okay, to put that in perspective, that's almost 1.6 billion bushels. And so as we dig into that, we're saying, well, what's going on there? Well, if you remember back, we've made some big changes, or they've made some big change in their hog herd. And the way I like to think of it is that before African swine fever came into play, they had a lot of smaller players, and they were feeding them a little bit of anything. So what it sounds like is that, they said, there's about 30 to 40 million metric tons of demand of basically the energy side of equivalents like corn and other products that you just can't feed the meat scraps and other stuff. You need to come to more of a corn and soybean ration. So that stepped up their demand. So what that forced China to do is to continually step in and buy more products that they can feed to the hogs. In the interim, what they're doing is that they're using a lot of wheat. Their wheat demand is bumped up, over pushing 40 million metric tons, and they're using that to kind of help them tide over. But they need the corn to be able to feed to those hogs.
Very good. Jeff, as we wrap up, anything in particular this week you're keeping an eye on?
Yeah, we really are. We're continuing to watch the Chinese corn demand. Are they continuing to buy on the new crop side? Are they taking the shipments on the old crop? We're also keeping a very close eye on the U.S. and the South American weather, just to see how those areas are progressing.
Very good. Jeff Peterson, the president of Heartland Farm Partners, joining us as we take a look at the market activity as we start the new week. Of course, for more markets, you can log on to our website, ruralradionetwork.com.